Hello everyone, this is Scarzig, and today I wanted to make a quick video talking about Eggmar. It's a deck type that I have experimented with a lot, especially recently, and it has some problems, of course. Some people think it's not enough support, and other people think this, and the other thing. But I've been kind of mulling it over the last couple of days. What do we need to do to make Rebirth Eggmar viable, or rather a bit stronger. You don't want it to be too strong is the problem. And that kind of brings me to my first point, that the archetype itself, right? You have these minions that if you don't allocate additional resources to kill them, right, completely, they come back to life with full HP. And you know what I mean? Everything that you invested in killing them is thrown out the window. And so if you deal with these minions inefficiently, it's super easy to fall behind. And Counterplay has been very conservative with Rebirth as a keyword in general. Back before Shim'Zar, when Veteran Silithar was a 4/5, it was a really solid 4-drop. This was before Earth Sister came out. This was before Sunsteel Defender came out, and Veteran Silithar was really solid. But it wasn't too broken. Again, it was just really strong. You had to put in that additional resource. But before I get sucked too far into that, let's get some stuff knocked out of the way first. I wanted to talk quickly about Flaming Stampede. Just to get this knocked out of the way, I normally would make a case for this card, but currently it pretty much doesn't do anything. For 8 mana, you deal 5 damage to everything. Your Rebirth minions get to turn into eggs, right? They get to survive the lava, but then they come back, right? You play this on 8 mana, your opponent gets to take a full turn to deal with the eggs that are left over, or just finish you off because you just did 5 damage to yourself. And so if you want to use this to damage your opponent and close out a game, now you can just use Entropic Decay or Elucidator, etc., etc. It doesn't really do that purpose. As a board clear, it's, iffy at best, because dealing 5 to everything, late game, there isn't going to be like swarms of stuff on the board, and if there is, you're probably better off playing a Plasma Storm, and then that way you would have theoretically 3 mana left over to do something. So this is kind of a decent idea, but currently it just doesn't do enough to warrant the cost. So to move to the next card, Lava Lance, want to talk about this real quick. 1 mana deal 2 damage is actually pretty decent. You'd think that an effect like this you could probably attach and draw a card to it to instantly make it just a really good card. But of course you can't do that with Magmar because of all their other stuff they got going on with Starhorn and whatnot. But dealing 2 damage to a minion and then dealing 4 damage if you have an egg on the board is pretty narrow. The whole thing is that dealing 4 damage for 1 mana is good, but being able to set it up where you have an egg on the board is kind of You have to make sure you have your young Silithar trade into something. This card does combo really well with Rex, I won't lie, because it moves at the beginning of the turn, becomes an egg, and then you're pretty much guaranteed to have this to follow up with. Rex trades into the general and deals 3 damage, or it hits a minion and deals 3 damage, and then you can finish it off with the Lava Lance. Or normally the way I saw this card was the 2 damage to a minion is really good for taking out ranged minions, which Magmar typically struggles with. If something really important gets away from you to the other side of the map, Magmar has to do a little bit of dancing around, right, to get at it, outside of stuff like natural selection, or hopefully it's under the threshold for Plasma Storm, right? That gives them like a global thing going on. And Lava Lance allows them to kind of, take out that Heartseeker or that Mini Jax or something before it becomes a problem. But minions like that you would normally want to use Lava Lance on are usually weak to all of their other removals, such as natural selection. So it kind of has its job taken by other things. But I still think this has potential. I still think it really does, because it's hard to set up for 4 damage, but I think that if a deck were to be built, maybe using Rex to, you know, kind of control the early game along with some egg stuff going on. Maybe Lava Lance could be good, but right now it's just in a really bad spot. I'm still experimenting though, so I'll check back with you on Lava Lance. But Rex did want to quickly go over him as he pertains to the Eggmar subtype, because he has Rebirth, but he's kind of like Tuskbore, where it drops down, does something annoying for your opponent, and your opponent has to allocate extra resources, or else it's going to keep coming back and just, you know, pinging them over and over again, trading the things or hitting them in the face. So this is just a nice little 1-mana annoyance that your opponent has to dedicate extra resources in order to kill. And that's how Magmar pulls ahead, right? They drop stuff that their opponent has to spend a lot of cards on, and then as they ramp up and play on curve, eventually you run out of answers, and then they're able to take over the board. Eggmar does this a little bit differently because of the way the hatching mechanics all work. Eggmar becomes more of a late game combo deck, and that's kind of the problem, where the deck type itself doesn't have enough early tools. And that's kind of where my Smashing Eggs deck came into play, where the being able to just trade into everything and do big face damage, you know, just buffing your general with Overgrowth, of course. Overload. And then, you know, just hitting stuff was what was allowing me to control the early mid game. And then once I got to late game, I was doing the big combos with Valknut's Seal and everything like that. But to move over onto the cards that I think are really good for the Rebirth subtype, of course we have Young Silithar, the poster child, 2-mana, 2/3, just a fantastic early game stat line, has Rebirth. Again, it does the same thing as Rex, where your opponent has to allocate additional resources to kill the egg, or, you know, you get really good value out of it. Valknut's Seal, I really like this card as a late game win condition, because if your general is buffed, then Valknut's Seal allows you to either, you know, basically give yourself celerity, or I have used it before to give myself that one extra tile of reach in order to get in and close the distance on my opponent, or to get around a provoke or something. So Valknut's Seal I really do enjoy. I like that at 4 mana you technically can play it by itself, but because of the nature of the Spirit of Valknut, it's a direct copy of your general. You want to play it late game when you actually have a really good stat line, right? Because let's say you played Valknut's Seal on 4 mana and your opponent doesn't have a ping, right? They don't have a Blood Tear Alchemist or a spell or anything to take care of it, and then it hatches. You suddenly get a 2/25. And that sounds really strong, right? Because you have another huge body that's just trading into stuff and helping you clear the board, but it is a minion, so it's still vulnerable to hard removal. And Valknut's Seal, I think, has so much potential value for the late game, you typically don't want to play it by itself, but I think it's really solid, and I love this card. Wanted to quickly talk about Eggmorph as well. At 4 mana, it's one of Magmar's, you know, solid removals from way back in the day. This has really been overshadowed by Thumping Wave, because Eggmorph has that Dispel capability, right? And it can reset a buff that a minion has received. You change it into an egg, and when it hatches, it turns back into that minion. Eggmorph was a little bit stronger before the egg changes took place, because it would actually remain an egg throughout your opponent's turn. And now, because eggs hatch at the beginning of the turn, you need to make sure you kill the egg, or your opponent basically gets a rush minion, right? And so Eggmorph, usually, if you're using it for removal, needs to be run alongside Blood Tear Alchemist or something. And every once in a while, you can Eggmorph something big and hit it with your general. This kind of turns into an Entropic Decay situation, where it's ever so slightly perhaps overcosted, but again, it's really powerful. And the only reason I think that Eggmorph isn't seeing like a lot more complaints about how strong it is because Thumping Wave is so ridiculous. Because you basically, anything that's within range of your general within 2 spaces, you basically say, I'm going to kill this by trading in 3 HP. And for a faction like Magmar, that's actually really good because Earth Sphere and things. But not to get too hung up on Eggmorph, I like that it's 4 mana. Again, this is a late game hatch and egg combo piece. This being 4 mana makes it so you need to wait till like 8 7, 8, 9 mana before you can make those big Rebirth plays. And I would like to see Rebirth be able to make plays like that a little bit earlier in the game. And I think that that's where a lot of their untapped power lies. And we're going to get into a little bit of why I think they don't have that capability, right? Like being able to make those huge plays earlier. We have More and Cur. This does, basically it's the same thing as Eggmar, where you're able to put this on your general. You know what it does. You damage something with your general, all friendly eggs hatch. And this is like the big holy grail godsend combo on 9 mana, where you throw out a Chrysalis Burst and then do More and Cur, and then hit the opponent's general or their minion or something, and then all of those eggs hatch, and then you just get like a really good tempo swing, get a lot of bodies on the board. Or if they spawn in the correct spots, you know, they just hatch with Rush and you kill your opponent. I like comboing this card with Spirit of Valknu as well, because the +3 attack by the time you get to 9 mana basically guarantees that if you're using Overload throughout the game, you know, Valknu's going to spawn with like maybe 7 attack, 6, 7 attack. And, you know, you get either a double burst of 14 damage, or you get that extra 7 damage burst in on a minion, or just to pressure your opponent even more. So I like More and Cur. It's definitely justified at 5 mana. It was, at the time it was spoiled, right? The time it was revealed, it was the most expensive artifact in the game. So to go to our next slot, we have the Veteran Silithar. This is the elephant in the room. Veteran Silithar used to be a 4/5, and when Shim'Zar released and they changed Rebirth so that the minions hatch at the beginning of your turn and gained Rush, they preemptively nerfed this to a 4/3 because they didn't want it to be too good. And I completely understand why they did that. A 4 mana 4/5 that, you know what I mean, that would just respawn with full health if you didn't have that extra damage to kill it would be absolutely monstrous. One of the reasons Veteran Silithar was so strong back in the day was you could bring it out turn 1 with Flash Reincarnation. So turn 1, you flash Veteran Silithar, and you have your 4/3 on the board. This is what Magmar still does with Sunsteel Defender. Excuse me. And when you compare this card directly to Sunsteel Defender is actually, you know, a lot stronger because of the ability to bring it out with Flash Reincarnation on turn 1. Or, you know, you can squeeze it out at 2 mana on you're going your next turn or your turn after, because if you're going second, you have 3 mana, you play a 2 mana minion on the tile and then flash Sunsteel, and then suddenly you have, you know, a Young Silithar and then a Sunsteel Defender. Or when you're on 4 mana, you get to do the same thing. Double Sunsteel Defender is just super good, especially when compared directly with this card. Veteran Silithar is simply got outclassed. Even before people stopped running it, when it was a 4/5, people were still running Sunsteel Defender over this card, and they were still running Earth Sister over this card. So it was already on its way out of like the Magmar top tier decks. But then, you know, they had to change it. People have requested that this card, you know, become a 4/4. And that would make it a lot... It wouldn't feel as bad, right, to run it in a Rebirth deck. But I don't think that that's... Unfortunately, I don't think that's enough. It would make it a solid minion, and I would run it in my Rebirth deck, a 4 mana 4/4. The problem is that Magmar relies so heavily on ramping out their 4 mana minions with Flash Reincarnation. Earth Sister, not so much anymore since that nerf, because if you could bring her out turn 1 as a 3/3 that had that AoE that traded into everything, it was still a really solid play, even if you missed out on that burst. But even nowadays, being able to bring Earth Sister out, and it does 2 damage AoE to everything as it enters play, and then it's a 3/2 that your opponent still needs to, you know, scatter their forces a little bit and then trade something into it, it still gets a lot of value overall because of its effect. And Veteran Silithar, you can't realistically bring it out turn 1 with Flash Reincarnation. It spawns as a 4/1, and so your opponent, you know, could easily have, you know, a Dispel or Blood Tier Alchemist, and because of the meta currently now, double Blood Tier would just completely ruin you. But here's the thing, if they don't have a way to deal with it, theoretically, Veteran Silithar could trade into something, right? They could trade into a 2-3 or just waits in the back and gets a really nice trade as a 4-1. And then if your opponent can't kill the egg, you get your value. And that's the whole thing about Rebirth, is that you have to position properly in order to protect these eggs. And I think that if you are able to trade in a Veteran Silithar and you weren't using something like Morinkur or Eggmar or whatever to rehatch it and get instant double dip value from it, then you should be rewarded for keeping the egg alive, for having it die in a position that your opponent can't reach, right? And so they can't have it as a 4-5 because it would be too strong on its own, just played on 4 mana. And it might be a bit too good if you're able to flash it out as a 4-3 on turn 1, right? That would be like playing a Windblade Adept that had, you know, 1 or 2 points of HP. Veteran Silithar is treated just like Lion minions are, where you don't want to just weaken them. You want to make sure you have all the resources available to fully kill them off. And that's what Veteran Silithar, fortunately, that's what happens to it. Like Sunsteel Defender, sometimes your opponent can't deal with it. It kills something, and it's still a 4-3 because of its force field. But Veteran Silithar, if you use it to trade into anything, it becomes a 4-1. Or if it trades into something with 3 attack, it's dead. So you have to, like, babysit this card. You can't just throw it down and have it do work for you. You have to play around with this card. And that's why people don't like it, and that's why it feels so weak, because it can't help you come back into the game the way a Sunsteel can or the way an Earth Sister can, and it lacks that additional utility that Magmar really likes. So there could be some changes to this card. This is, again, this is probably the card I'm going to spend the most time talking about, because this is such a core mana cost for the Rebirth subtype, because all of your stuff starts to come online at like 7+ mana, and 4 mana, there's nothing there. It's very anemic when it comes to the Rebirth slot. And you can't make Veteran Silithar a 3 mana minion, because then this card is really, really strong at 3 mana. Because you have your Young Silithar as a 2-3, and then a 3 mana 4-3 is actually really solid with Rebirth again. And so you can't let Magmar have a really, really strong 2-drop, a strong 3-drop, and then a strong 4-drop slot in Earth Sister and Sunsteel Defender to stack right on top of that. And that's why they didn't just nerf Veteran Silithar stats and make it a 3-drop, because you can't have this be such a good 3-drop, and that's why Thrakes isn't super good on its own, right? You have to use that to combo with something. You can't have Magmar, you can't give them a good 3-drop slot because their 4-drop slot is so good. And that's another issue that's kept Veteran Silithar down, is that it needs to be 4 mana, or else you give Magmar too much good stuff. I might even come back to this if there's a couple points that I want to go back over, but we'll move on for now. I wanted to quickly talk about Wild and Scepter. This is another Egg Hatcher combo piece, and it comes with a body, which is nice, but because all of your Egg Hatchy shenanigans are all late game combo, usually finishers, Wild and Scepter doesn't really have a place, because you're usually just finishing off the game and you don't care about having the body, so typically you end up running an extra Eggmar for something to have that additional utility of removal. If Wild and Scepter was 3 mana, right, you get a 3 mana 3/3, that early in the game, there's typically not going to be too much stuff that you can hatch. I suppose if you went turn 1 Young Silithar, and then your opponent played like turn 2 Silverguard Knight or Ooze or something, right? Something with 3 attack or more, and then your Young Silithar trades in, and then you can play Wild and Scepter and rehatch the Young Silithar, and then it gets another good trade, and then suddenly you flip the board, and you have 3/3. You have a 3/3 on the board, and theoretically your Young Silithar turns back into an egg. So your opponent needs to deal with the egg, and then you have a 3/3. I'm not sure if counterplay was really like expecting that to be an enormously strong play. I would like again to see Wild Inceptor be a 3-mana 3/3, just so that it's easier to use it as a combo piece like it's intended. And if you get a really bad opening hand, you don't feel terrible about having to play this card as a 3/3, right? A 4-mana 3/3 is just horrendous. So a 3-mana 3/3 would make Wild Inceptor really, really good. I still run one copy of this card in my egg deck because I like the potential utility of using Flash Reincarnation on this thing. And that might be another reason why they didn't want to make this 3 mana, because with Flash Reincarnation, this becomes 1 mana hatch and egg. But it's a 2-card combo, and maybe, Magmar having some additional tools in this mid-game space would let people experiment more with that mid-range style. Rebirth is like very necromancery, right? Like you're using these same minions and bringing them back to life to keep doing work for you. And that's a design space people would normally associate with maybe Abyssine or something, but I really enjoy it. Having to starve out your opponent by causing them to use additional resources on your minions that just won't stay dead. It's pretty cool, and honestly, nobody's ever gotten the Veteran Silithar trades into the opponent's general, and they just so happen to have +1 attack, and then you rehatch it with Wild Inceptor, and then you do 4, 8, and then have some other hatch method with like more incur or something, and then you do 12. That's like asking for a lot of stuff to go right. And so to go to the Dreadnought, this minion, I love it so much, but I have to shit on it a little bit. Dreadnought has Rebirth itself, and a lot of people forget this. I've actually won games because people throw a bunch of stuff at the Dreadnought, and then it turns into an egg, and they go, oh, I forgot that it turns into an egg. And so then they just concede because it's going to rehatch as a 4/6. All the resources they just spent killing it just go for nothing, right? And so that they just lose the game from that tempo loss. But anyway, it gives all the other eggs you summon +2/+2. And so Dreadnought is really, really strong if you get it to stick on the board, because suddenly your Chrysalis Burst, which I'm going to get to, is like way harder for your opponent to remove. You could theoretically play Spirit of Valknu as a 2/3, and it would be hard for your opponent to remove, and then it kind of gets to hatch. You don't necessarily need to combo anymore. It just, again, makes your Rebirth minion super hard to remove. But the problem is Dreadnought at 6 mana it comes down way too late. There's nothing with Rebirth that you're typically going to be playing because Veteran Silithar is so bad. And if for some reason, you have egg minions on the board like Young Silithar or Veteran Silithar, and then you play the Dreadnought, you're just winning more. That's the problem, is that Dreadnought just becomes a win more card. It's not just going to stick and do work on its own. It's just making the Rebirth minions that you already have, that your opponent already couldn't deal with and clear, and it's making them even harder to clear. So you're just stomping your opponent in. Bringing this out with Flash Reincarnation is kind of good. Because a 4/4 with Rebirth, right, that Veteran Silithar stat line people were talking about, is really decent, because, again, this has Rebirth on its own. But you have to combo it with Flash Reincarnation. And at 6 mana, it directly competes with Mechanitor Warbeast for a slot, and Mandrake for the 6 mana slot, so it gets shoved out. And you can't make Dreadnought a 5 mana card, because being able to flash this out on 3 mana, right? Going your first turn, going second, flashing this out. If they made it like a 4/5 and then made it cost 5 mana, and then maybe your eggs only got +1/+1, or maybe they made it into a 3/5 for 5 mana, that's kind of weak, right? That stat line, even so, because Dancing Blades has a really good opening gambit, and it's a 4/6, and it costs 5. The problem is that Dreadnought has the potential to just completely shut your opponent out of the game. If you play your Young Silithar turn 1, and then you ramp into Veteran Silithar onto 4 mana, right, for your next turn, and then next turn you play Dreadnought on 5, or you Flash Reincarnation and bring it out, suddenly you have this crazy minion with Rebirth, and then the eggs that your opponent that you're getting from trading into your opponent's stuff from Young Silithar, Veteran Silithar are even harder to clear. It's just too much stuff that they can't possibly have resources to clear out. And that's the danger of Dreadnought, is they have to make it bad, because if you drop this thing and it sticks, it just wins you the game. And even when, check this, you remember when Dreadnought actually used to have a bug where when it would turn into an egg when it died, its own egg would be 2/3. And that was unintended, right? It wasn't supposed to buff its own egg. When Dreadnought dies, its egg is a 0/1. And when its egg was a 2/3, when this thing would take 6 HP worth of damage, and then you had to deal 3 more HP to it, and whatever you were trading into it was taking 2 damage, like, it still wasn't played. And I thought that that was absolutely ridiculous, because it just comes down at 6 mana and it's so slow, and you don't have a board typically, right, at 6 mana. Because if you already have a board, like I just said, I don't want to repeat myself, if you already have a board and then you drop this sucker down, you're just winning more. You're just stomping your opponent into the dust, and that's no fun. But I would like to see maybe a nerf to its effect, maybe a nerf to the mana cost and stats, just to try to make this thing playable, because it's beautiful art, and I love the concept and the egg synergy. But to finally come back down around to Chrysalis Burst, after mulling over the Eggmar subtype in my head for a few days, I finally arrived at Chrysalis Burst. This card is absolutely stupid. The Rebirth deck right now is so bad that it needs to rely on the swingy RNG of this card to stay in the game. Or, typically, the way I would think of it is that you play this on 4 mana, and what it does is it forces your opponent to scramble and waste resources and pull pressure away from you. Basically, they have to spend a turn dealing with the Chrysalis Burst, and it allows you to buy an extra turn. And then you play, maybe if you play back-to-back Chrysalis Burst, even if they both got answered theoretically, your opponent would have to spend so much resources doing that it would give you enough breathing room to get to the late game safely. But even that's like still no good, because if your opponent has Ghost Lightning, if they had any sort of opening hand with double Katara, for instance, or a Pax, or anything like that, if they have multiple bodies on the board as soon as you get to 4 mana, especially when you're going second, then they usually have just enough bodies on the board to clear this thing super duper easy, and you fall behind. Ghost Lightning, Blistering Scorn, that kind of stuff just completely ruin this card. And so this card, because it's so easily countered, I can understand why they think it's good to have in the game. The problem with Chrysalis Burst is that if your opponent doesn't deal with it, they just lose, right? And even sometimes then, they don't lose, because your eggs spawn in a really bad spot where you can't use them anyway, for at least for not a couple more turns. Or you get really, really bad spawns on the minions where you get like a Vindicator, Young Silithar, a Grow, and a Maloki Huntress or something, which, has a little bit of synergy, but or like Thrakes, Young Silithar, you get horrible weak minions out of this, and it's still not enough because you don't get to use them. They spawn in random spots, so you can't use them to block or defend or attack anything realistically. And then Chrysalis Burst sometimes gets you ridiculous stuff like Mandrake, Elucidator, Macantor Warbeast. Silithar Elder is the big offender with this card for sure, because if you play Chrysalis Burst and you get a Silithar Elder and your opponent can't deal with it, then you just ramped out this crazy minion that is designed to snowball the game, right? It's designed to give you that inevitability that wins you the late game, and you give that to your opponent, and you say, try to deal with this, plus the 3 other eggs, right? Because sometimes your opponent only has enough resources to deal with only maybe 1 or 2, so they're going to prioritize dealing with the Silithar Elder. But sometimes they might have a way to deal with an egg or 2, but sometimes the egg will spawn, because the location is random, it will spawn in a spot where your opponent can't deal with it. And then it becomes just like old Lantern Fox, where your opponent is losing to straight up RNG. The minion selection is random, and the location that it place itself is random, and then they can't do anything, and then it snowballs the game and they lose. Unless, of course, you're playing like a ridiculously aggressive deck and you think you can just smork the game out before it becomes a factor. I don't like, again, that this has the ability to instantly win you the game. And because this card costs 4 mana, this is the reason all of the other egg hatching stuff, Morincur, Wild Inceptor, Eggmorph, right? All of those, that's why those have to be expensive. To make plays like that only happen at the end of the game as a finisher. You can't do stuff like Chrysalis Burst, then Eggmorph, the one you want to keep, right? You don't want it to be an egg. You want a Chrysalis Burst and then keep the really best spawn that you get using the Wild Inceptor or the Eggmorph or whatever. It's such a nightmare. This card gates the possible power levels that they can put in certain Rebirth cards. The same way Shadow Nova was gating what they could actually do with Shadow Creep. Old Shadow Nova, for those who aren't familiar, Shadow Creep used to just do damage to the minion that was standing on it. That was equivalent to every Shadow Creep tile in play. So if you had 5 Shadow Creep tiles all over the map, and then you spawned one under your opponent, it would do 6 damage to them when you ended your turn, right? And we have Obliterate to do that now, where it totals up all the Shadow Creep and then deals that damage. But back in the day, you would play Shadow Nova, which just spawns 4 Shadow Creep tiles anywhere you want. You play that under your opponent, they take at least 4 damage, and the next turn they take 8 damage. Anyway, it was ridiculous, and because of that design, they couldn't add any other Shadow Creep generation mechanics to the game because it would make Shadow Nova way too strong. So that's why they reworked Shadow Creep to the way it works now, and they were able to add so much stuff like Ooze and what's it called? Sphere of Darkness, Klaxon, all those cards that we know and love. Abyssal Juggernaut is really good. You know what I mean. Abyssal Crawler was reworked to generate Shadow Creep. So Chrysalis Burst, again, it just limits their design space so heavily when it comes to this deck type. And if this card were to be reworked, I don't know what you would do. Maybe if Chrysalis Burst was only drew from a certain pool of minions, right? There was like a separate subset of minions that only spawn from Chrysalis Burst eggs, kind of like battle pets. And it would give you a tighter expected value, right, that you could actually play around. It wasn't super swingy the way it is now. Even Nature's Confluence kind of does that, and it's borderline. I think it's because, you know, depending on the board state and the situation, the battle pets that you get off of Nature's Confluence isn't going to be that great, or it could be really, really good if your opponent has an empty board and you spawn 4 decks next to them, which is the Celerity battle pet, 2/5 Celerity. But, so Chrysalis Burst, if it did that, it would be a bit too similar to Nature's Confluence. If it Chrysalis Burst, maybe if it duplicated an egg, the way Fractal Replication did, where you trade in your young Silithar, your veteran Silithar, and then you play Chrysalis Burst, and then its egg multiplies by 3, right? Then you get 4 young Silithar eggs, either nearby or scattered randomly all over the board. You're using it to say, I want more of this thing, and then your opponent has to deal with it. That would be pretty interesting because you have to have an egg on the board, right? You'd have to play it as a combo on your turn in a smart way. The problem is that if you were to get it to go off, it would probably be ridiculous. So you can even see that even the ideas I'm trying to come up with for this card would still be kind of broken, because you could maybe even get like a Dreadnought and then Chrysalis Burst it. So maybe you get like 1 or 2 copies of an egg. But that's the whole problem. This card needs to be reworked before more things can be done with Rebirth, because all of the stuff that you want to do, like hatching your eggs over and over again so that you can get multiple rush things going on, as like a combo finisher, is not viable. They have to make that stuff really, really expensive and hard to pull off, because you can't have the egg hatchers work for your Chrysalis Burst. Morincur being the go-to 9 mana combo. And currently, the reason that stuff works is because Veteran Silithar is a 4/3. You get to trade into something with 3 or more attack, or their general if they've buffed themselves. And so if Veteran Silithar was buffed to be tankier in some respects, or more, more Rebirth minions were introduced that didn't have as much HP to balance out the fact they have Rebirth, then that being able to hatch them with Rush and do things like that are what, would really make the deck type function. You either get to double dip on the things that you're hatching, or you get to make sure your eggs are pre-hatched so that you can guarantee your opponent can't, take them out for free or with just rather a 1 damage ping. Pardon me. And so I think I've pretty much gone over what I wanted to say when it comes to Rebirth. And you'll notice I haven't talked about Silithar Elder because the way it works late game, it's too expensive to combo with any of the egg hatching stuff. And it just does what it's always done. They nerfed it a little bit to make up for the eggs hatching. It it snowballs a bit faster than it used to, but it's still too slow. But that's its own thing. Silithar Elder comes and goes depending on the meta. But I just wanted to talk about the concept of how all of these other cards relate to each other and why certain things are basically made weak on purpose or have to cost a certain amount of mana because of the way they interact with other cards and with other mana slots, which is what we talked about with the Veteran Silithar. So according to this timer, I've been rattling on for almost 40 minutes. I knew that this video would end up being like crazy long, but thank you for sticking with me. And let me know what you think about the Eggmar and Rebirth as a deck type, and maybe what you'd like to see. Or if you just wanted to see it gone from the game. Maybe Rebirth is just, a keyword that just gets really good value on certain minions, and maybe they don't need to support it. But let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. You have a good one.